Yeah, so thanks everyone. And so my name is Jason, and I'm leading and coordinating the work package 2, which is regarding the specification and format. And yeah, so I'm from the University of Warwick and the Department of WMG within the University of Warwick, within the same team as Siddhartha. And yeah, so without further ado, I think let me just jump into the scope and also yeah, the content that I'm going to cover in today's slides. So first, I will talk about the goal for work package 2, and then I will discuss why we feel we need such format, and then I will talk about the requirements clusters, which is the outcome of something that is that's derived from our requirement list. And then in the end, I will go through one of the example of the requirement cluster and illustrate some of the ideas we have at the moment. And before I dive into deeper, just want to remind you that this is a concept phase. So we are lucky enough to have very active participation and contribution in our group. And because of the nature of the concept phase, so right now we are actually considering more than one type of ODD format, and we're making a very good effort of ensure that each format that is submitted either from the project members or as part of the discussion result is detailed, documented, and presented in the final concept paper, so we can carry over to the standardization phase and to further refine it. So yeah, so that's the overall background. And maybe I will just first dive into the goal for work package 2. So this has been refined in the early phase of the OpenODD concept project. So basically, our work package will describe the semantic and the syntactic description of the ODD description for format. And it will include the capability of describing conditional ODD description using some or all of the ODD attributes. And the format should have a strong favor for simulation execution, but it's not limited to only the simulation usage only. And I think Siddhartha has already previously shared what is ODD. So I just resharing here because I think, yeah, before we dive in deeper, it is very important to understand what is actually ODD. But I think I will not duplicate the definition which has been previously covered. But just a quick note on this is the SAEJ 3016 definition is currently a very widely recognized definition for ODD, and throughout this concept, we are also adhering to something similar to this definition for the ODD. And then let's discuss why we need a format in the first place. So this is an example which I extracted from the BSI Plus 1883 Annex A. So this is currently widely used as a tabular format for ODD description. So such format actually has quite a lot of limitations. So for example, it does not tell you what is the grammars or rules that you need to use to interpret this tabular format. And also, as you can see, this also does not consider the whole list of attributes, whether it's included or not included. So we also need somehow to attach to this tabular format, you know, what we meant by the missing attributes in here, which you will see later on in our refined textual format. We actually have some function to handle the missing attributes in the form of permissive and restrictive. And also, this tabular format is also not good at handling dependencies. So if I want to say, for example, motorway is not purely suitable, but not purely unsuitable, it has dependency on many other attributes. So to show such dependency in tabular format is also quite a limitation. And also to implement such tabular format, you could argue you could define a parser or something based on a fixed tabular form to execute it, but it is far from ideal to execute based on a table. And also the efficiency, you can see as we getting a wider and bigger ODD, the list of attributes you need to use and also tripping in the dependencies you need to illustrate can very easily scale up. So you could have many pages of the same ODD definition using the tabular format. So this is just one of the form where we need an ODD format. more importantly, in a textual format, using the example of a tabular format just to show our motivation. Now let me run you through some of the early stage process that we performed as part of the concept project. So we started with a list of user stories covering different actors, which ranging from development engineer to test engineer, data scientist, to developer, all the way to infrastructure operators. And each of them have received a very good amount of list of user stories from our members and from the ideation stage. So the first thing we did is to, based on these user stories and also from our members' input, we actually collected further a more detailed requirement list. So this is just a very small part of that list. We actually have a very long list, and that was after many iterations of refinement. So this requirement list is more concrete as the next step, building from the user story and from, yeah. So this is the next step, but it is too detailed. So we actually then carry out the grouping process to cluster some of the similar requirements into a list of very refined and concise requirement clusters, which is in here. So we ended up with 15 requirement clusters, which will be the main focus for our next slides. So basically, yeah, we're going from user story to requirement list and to clusters. And for each clusters, we actually provide solutions and provide discussions around those. And the content of those clusters will then contribute into the concept paper and for the consideration of for the standardization project. So now let's maybe zoom in, and I will give a very 1 or 2 lines quick brief discussion, introduction of some of the clusters. So these are the total 15 clusters we are currently considering. And the orange part in the first 2 are regarding the readability, so human readability and machine readability. They are very high-level requirements. They might not be able to explain using a very specific technical examples. So that's why in here we group them into overall readability requirements, which just means the language needs to be both human and machine readable. And for the rest, which is the main part of the blue part, they are the ones that we can definitely link to a very technical, detailed challenge, and also receive technical solutions, proposed solutions for those. So those are the ones that we are actually very actively populating the content these days, and those will form the main format part of the main content for the format of the language. So for example, composability in charge of how you can come up with a mechanism which allow you to compose 2 smaller ODDs into a wider ODD. And the parameterization templating basically talk about how you can use a variable inside the ODD. So without mentioning the value, and then the parameterization of that value will actually depend on the implementation. So I can say speed limit as a placeholder for the variable of speed limit within my ODD without saying what is the value, and then we parameterization it, later on. And conditional ODD, conditional statement is a strong focus, because a lot of the ODD, one of the fundamental requirements is able to illustrate conditional and also dependencies on each other. So we have a very good discussion and also solution around this. And the extensibility of ontology. So ODD actually linked to other external ontology or internal ontology. So Nico from work package 1 is mainly in charge of providing our ARM preferred default ontology. And we also talk about how you can further extend it for your own use cases. And the binary boundary basically tells ODD can only be inside ODD or outside ODD. And we eliminate this fuzziness of the boundary. And the classification, class matrix data type unit talk about more in details when you want to define a specific ODD attributes like rainfall. What are the associated elements you need to consider when you mention in the syntax? And the same class hierarchy expressiveness abstraction talk about potential linking to the underlying ontology and how you can construct the ODD at different ontology levels rather than the leaf node. So allow you to put description at a much higher parent node. And the extensibility by function is mainly currently has been raised by the matrix group. Basically, the functions are not a has been considered as part of the extension to the ODD format. So we also discussed about the extensibility of by function, and operators is also needed when you want to talk about, for example, speed greater than 10 km/h or rainfall less than 15 mm/h. So those operators, both mathematical and logical, we have incorporated a list of comprehensive operators. And in the end of the blue ones, the permissive and the restrictive actually tackles both from the overall global ODD perspective, but as well as individual level. Basically, it says what is inside ODD and what is outside ODD. And we have much more detailed mechanism to allow you to write in a more efficient way by utilizing the global permissive and the restrictive mode. And we also have these two red ones, which tells you, this needs to be compatible with the OpenX and also integratable with the scenario-based testing workflow. So those are more of a harmonization and also ASAM internal harmonization activities, and that's why they belong to also the same categories. And we also in constant communication and harmonization with other projects, for example, OpenX ontology, Open Scenario, in order to answer these two red requirement clusters. And in the end, the green part is actually being handled by work package 3 and 4. So they focus on the matrix and also the uncertainty. And as Siddhartha illustrated on that colorful boxes, so they are not directly part of the format, but they are an extension to the format, which allow you to use the format in a more practical way. So that itself is also another standalone requirement clusters. So this is a very quick overview of all the clusters, and now let me maybe dive into one example. So for each of the clusters, we have developed a template to describe the problem and provide solutions in a very detailed way. And let's focus on the conditional statement. And basically, this is our template for now. So for each of the clusters, we have a summary, which, for example, in this case, the conditional statement basically says the language specification is to support conditional statement for expressing reduced ODD. And this can be tackled by allowing the language to impose constraints on operation range of specific ODD elements in any level of the ODD hierarchy. So basically, it elaborates what we meant by these clusters. And we also, alongside that, we have drafted a few example challenges. So for example, considering the taxonomy of the BSI past 1883, we would like to express motorways suitable, and it's only suitable when there's no rain. And within the geometry, upslope is not suitable. And then because as I mentioned before, we are lucky to have a lot of contributions from the members on different proposals of the syntax. So it is a very huge task to harmonize all the syntax into one unified format. So right now we're actually considering all the different syntax examples. And here is just one of the example that we use. And we also have, say, Open Scenario 2.0 like syntax and many other syntax submitted by the group member. But on top of all the syntax example, we also came up with a way to explain the problem statement in a more syntax independent way, but not exactly independent. So we are using a neutralized query semantics to explain what is actually the underlying semantics of these requirements. So for example, this very specific challenge basically says, let's select some situations. So the situation can be from your driving simulator, from your scenario database. So select things from the situation where motorway and not rain and not upslope. So basically it says we want a situation where motorway is true and the negation of rain and the negation of upslope. And basically this is a very bare semantics of these example challenges. And we also in here you can see one of the example syntax which we put in here to explain as a response of the challenge. So for example, you can say in the beginning we want to include BSI plus 1883 taxonomy, which corresponding to this sentence, and then we just say suitable motorway except when rain, and also unsuitable upslope. And you might wondering what happened to the rest of the attributes if we do not define if we do not define say the snowfall, or if we do not define like the pavement, those elements, what happened to them? So this actually is tackling, as I mentioned before, in another cluster, which is the permissive and the restrictive. So in a more complete ODD, we will also have illustrate of what under which permissive or restrictive mode our ODD is operating, so that you can infer the missing attributes by using that. So this is just one of the example, and we are not only limited to this. We also have contribution from the rest of the group member. But in here, just to give you a favor, I can only provide a very small example. But yeah, stay tuned, and for more detailed example, please stay tuned, and we will hopefully our documentation will be out in the near future.